Good evening, all. So, when we're talking about family assessment, what we have to understand is this. uh, Different schools use different modalities to expand their understanding of families. So, it can be either an interview or a scale, it can be anything. And there are some schools which are very elaborate in getting the data, and there are some schools which are not so elaborate. They only look at the specific problem that is being presented. However, before working with families, we need to understand that there are certain basic dimensions that are a must that we should know about the families before starting our intervention or before starting our work with families. Now, let's look at the first aspect of it. It's called as the presenting problem. Now, what is presenting problem? Like last time, someone asked a question: who is the problem bearer? Now, in all families, if you look at it, there will be someone who will be brought out as the person with the problem. And all the interactions and all the difficulties will be revolving around that person. And here, what we are looking at right now is the problem. What is the presenting problem that we are looking at? So, what we need to do as a therapist when you have 4 or 5 people sitting in front of us, what do we need to look at? We have to start looking at more details about the presenting problem. For example, if misbehaving is the problem, then what are the possible questions that we could ask? What does he do? How long has this been going on? To get more information about the problem itself, when did it start? If he misbehaves, for how long does it go? What reasons does he misbehave for? What incident happens before he misbehaves and after he misbehaves? So these are informations that will give us a clearer understanding of what is happening or what is the presenting problem. The next thing we have to understand is we have to give each member a chance to give their account of the problem. Now, everybody, all of our perceptions are very different. Even though we belong to the same family, our understanding, our acknowledgement of the problem will be very different from one to the other. So each member has to be given a chance to tell their account of the problem, and not just the descriptions of the problem. We also have to understand the emotions associated with that problem. So if the son is misbehaving and we are talking to the mother about it, then we have to ask, when your son misbehaves, how does it make you feel? Or if you're asking the other sibling, the second sibling, about the problem, presenting problem, then you ask, when your brother misbehaves, what do you think happens at home? Who does what? How is the emotional atmosphere in the house? So these are important aspects that we have to get in terms of understanding the presenting problem itself. Now, the next aspect of presenting problem we have to understand is, what is the meaning that each of the member has associated with the presenting problem? Now, everybody will have an idea, or they will have their own belief of why the person is doing what they are doing. For example, if you ask the father, he will say, oh, he just wants to irritate me, that's why he is doing it. If you ask the mother, she will say, no, he just wants extra attention, that's why he is doing it. So there could be different ways or different meanings that each member attaches to the presenting problem. And we have to understand what that meaning is. And then we have to see what is the expectation of the family members by the end of the session. By the time we are done with all the sessions, what is the expectation, or what are they expecting to be changed within the system? That is very important to understand whether what we want to happen in the session and what the members want to see changed has to be matched. If it is not matching, then we are pulling them in one direction and they will be pulling us in the other direction. So the presenting problem, these are basic aspects of the presenting problem that we have to be able to get. Now, the next important aspect we have to understand in terms of assessment is, what is the context of referral? Now, most often, families are referred to us. Very rarely, at least in our Indian context, families, most often, they don't just walk into the session and say, you know what, we need help. Most often, they come through a friend, or they have been seeing an individual therapist and they have said that no, maybe if you work together as a family, things will change. So the referral comes in. The things that we have to understand about the family when they come to us are these: did the family come on their own, or were they referred by someone? This makes a lot of difference, because even if they are referred through someone, if the family has come willingly to take the effort to make that change, then as you start going through the session, you will start seeing the change. But if they were coerced into coming for the session, or even if one member of the family is forcefully brought to the session, then you can expect a lot of resistance to come when you're starting to work with them. All right. So that is another aspect of it. And if they were referred, who referred them and why? Because sometimes what happens is people think that when an individual therapist is referring a family, there could be various reasons why they are referring. Now, an individual therapist or another therapist understanding of the situation of the family will be very different. And as a family therapist, when we are working with them, our understanding will be very different. Now, both of that understanding of the family has to be synchronized at some level. If it's not synchronizing, then it's going to be a little bit of a problem. All right. So, why were they referred is very important to understand. Do all the members in the family feel the need for treatment? Have they all come willingly? All right. Now, note the point that in case of referrals, the agenda of the therapist who referred the family is also should be understood, primarily because, say, for example, there was one family which was referred where the son was being seen for individual therapy. Now, he assumed that as a child, he was sexually abused. Now, this has to be verified in a family therapy setting. So, the therapist had referred them. Now, this is purely working on the boy's assumption and his understanding that who else could have done it except my father. It's a very sensitive thing for someone to talk about it, and even more sensitive when you want to discuss about it in the family setting. So, this was the reason behind the referral, the agenda of the therapist who referred. So, we need to understand at what point are we going to discuss about the referral agenda and how are we going to bring it up. All right. So, these are things we have to understand about the context of referral itself. Now, to understand even more about the family, to expand our knowledge about the family itself, in the first place, we need to know the structural setting of the family. How are they placed? Are they living in a nuclear family? Are they living in a joint family setting? How many people are there in the family? Who plays the main role? So there are important structural aspects we need to understand about the family. Now, one way of understanding that is using the genogram. All right. Now, in the genogram, what do we do? If you look at the picture, I have given a 3-generational genogram. All right. So you have the grandparents, you have the parents and their siblings, and then you have the 3rd generation over there. Right. Now, this is how you will draw a genogram. So the basic structures will be inside. The square indicates male members. The circle indicates the female members of the family. All right. I will show you more signs in the next slide. Now, if you look at it, they have entered the age inside the square, which means the grandfather is 90. And you'll also see there is a cross across the square, which means he is no more. All right. So when you look at the genogram itself, you will know that this is what has, this is the physical structure of the family. All right. Now, what else can you learn from the genogram? You can understand the transgenerational family patterns that have changed or that has been inherited by the current family who's sitting in front of you. Why is this important? Because most often history repeats itself. So what the parents have gone through in terms of their childhood experience gets transmitted into this family. Now we have to understand parents are coming from two different families. Father's coming from one separate entity, mother's coming from another separate entity. Now, when they're coming from two backgrounds like that, there is going to be difficulties in terms of understanding which family norm is going to be followed. Should we follow the father's hereditary values, or should we follow the mother's side of the values? There will be a definite clash in understanding. So at what level has the compromise happened? What are the values that have been accepted? What are the values that have been set aside? And how was that done? How was it decided that these values will be taken in and these values will not be taken into consideration? These are aspects that you will understand in terms of the genogram. All right. Now, interactions are understood from a longitudinal perspective and from an epigenetic perspective as well. Now, if you look at this slide, these are the basic genogram symbols that you have to understand. All right. So if you look at this, the square indicates the male member. Circle indicates female members of the family. The next one, if you look at it, they're talking about the birth date. Look at the circle on the left. Above the circle, they have mentioned the birth date. All right. Most often we will not write the entire date. We will often mention the year. All right. And then the age, the current age of the person is mentioned inside the box or the circle. And then if the person is no more, then you have the date of their death, of the demise, on the right hand upper corner of the symbol. And then if you look at the line below that, you have a square and a circle, which is joined by three lines, right? Now that indicates that these two people have been married. And on that line or below that line, if you write M and the year, it means they were married in 1970. This is how you indicate the marriage of two people. And the next one, if you look at it, you have the line that connects the square and the circle is not complete. It's dotted lines, which indicates a living together relationship or an affair or an intimate relationship. Now, there again, we will mention from how long. All right. And then you have the next one, you have the lesbian couple, which is indicated with two circles and an inverted triangle, and a gay couple with two squares with an inverted triangle. Again, if you look at it, you don't have the complete line. You have again dotted lines joining the two members, indicating what kind of relationship they are in. All right. The third line, if you look at it, you have you have a cross across the marital relationship line, across the line that indicates marital relationship, which indicates they are separated. So just see the exact point where the cross has been drawn on the line. After married 1970, you have the cross, and then after the cross, it says S 1985, which means separated 1985. Okay. And then divorce, again, it's two crosses. So before the cross, you will write the married date, and after the cross, you will write the divorced date. And then the next one, you see that they have got back together. So you have two crosses and then one that's canceling the cross. So it means they have remarried. Understood? And then at the last line, if you look at it, you will see the children in that birth order. Now, how do you draw the children with the birth order? From the left hand side, the first child you will start from the left hand side. Understood? So from the left hand side, the first child will be the firstborn, then the secondborn, and then the third. So you go in that order. And if you see that if there is one line and then the square, it's a biological child. Dotted line, then it's a foster child. You have a straight line as well as a dotted line, then it means the child has been adopted. And then if you see that square with a cross, basically it means stillborn. And if it's a female child which was stillborn, then you will put a circle and then you will put a cross. And then if it's miscarriage, you have the triangle. And then abortion, again, you have the triangle. And if it's twins, you have two cross lines starting from the same point. And if it's identical twins, you join the twins. And then if it's square, then it is pregnancy. Now, this is how you will indicate at what state the family are in at that point of time. Okay. I hope you all understood the concept of genogram and how you draw it. Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. Someone's right. All right. I'll give you about, say, 3 minutes. If you all have a pen and a paper in your hand, quickly draw a genogram of your family. It need not be a 3-generational genogram. Even if it's your immediate family, just quickly draw a genogram of your family. I'll put the next slide. Yes. You can use these symbols to draw your genogram. If you have done it, please cross-verify the symbols, that if you have got the symbols right or not. Okay, that's nice. You can, if whoever can, you can actually take a photo of it and send it to the group. If you're comfortable, it's a choice. If you want to, you can definitely do it. Okay, that's nice. Okay, the marriage, you will not write it on the top. You will write it on top of that line, the horizontal line that is connecting the square and the circle. You will write on top of that M and the year. Okay, someone has tried a 3-generation genogram. Brilliant, very nice. All right. Now, you have written 56, 52 as grandparents. And then, okay, they are twins. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And you have, okay, triangle, you have put the husband in a triangle. Triangles do not come in there. Male members will be denoted with a square and female members with a circle. All right. Okay, I've got one more picture. Okay, which is good. All right, I got one more, which is like picture perfect. 54, 52 with the date of birth and married 1992, 24-year-old. Good, brilliant. Okay. First generation, is it husband's parents or wife? You will have to mention both. First generation, you will have to mention both the husbands and the wife's side parents. Now, if you look at the previous picture, I'll just go to the previous picture. Okay, here they have, okay, the third generation, they have mentioned only the wife's side family. But ideally, when you're collecting information from a family, you will be having both the husband's side parents as well as the wife's side parents. So you will have the husband's side and wife's husband's side parents on your left-hand side with the husband and his siblings. And then on the right-hand side, you will have the wife's parents and then the wife's wife and her siblings. And then you will get the children down as a third generation. All right. This interesting to see that all of you are eagerly participating in this. Wow, somebody has actually done it on the system. Good. Nice. All right. If you're okay, I'm going to move on to the next topic because I have, I'm getting a feedback that all of you have understood. how you have to draw the genogram. All right. Now, this is not just about drawing the genogram. Now, after you draw the genogram, what is the inference you're getting from the genogram? That is more important. All right. So when I look at the genogram, I should know who are all living together. Now, how do I denote it? I mark a circle around the people who are living at that point of time together. So, for instance, if I have my grandparents also staying with me, then when I'm putting the circle, I will circle it from the children, both the parents, to which grandparents are staying, and I will close the circle. It will be irregular in shape, doesn't matter. Point is, whoever, all the members are coming within that circle, basically means they are all living together. All right, that's the first inference. Second inference, we will also find out if there are any physical or psychiatric disorders which is there in the family, from the grandparents to the parents to the children. That is again another information that we have to get from the genogram. All right, so you will have to mention it there. Why is this genogram important? Because when you look at the genogram, you will see the major life cycle changes that is happening. For example, if in any one of them you see there is an abortion or a stillbirth, then how did the family cope with that situation? Who supported who? How long did it take for the husband and the wife to recover from it? When was the next child born? And in that gap, what happened? How was their relationship? Were there any major other difficulties that they faced during that time? So this is why we need the genogram. Now, if someone says that I was separated, what happened? What was the problem? How did they get separated? How long standing was the problem? And who helped at that process? How did they cope with their difficulties at that point of time? Now, at that point of time, difficulties can be the physical aspects, it can be financial, it can be psychological, it can be emotional trauma that they are going through at that point of time. Now, when they are presenting a child, an adolescent with a problem, and you have only the adolescent and the mother sitting there, and then you see a genogram which says, where the mother says that they were separated, and the mother is telling, my child has a problem, he's misbehaving, he's throwing a temper tantrum, he's not listening to me, then find out if when the problem started, from when the child started misbehaving. Most often when you look at it, with children especially, problems start aggravating. Their behavior difficulties, normal difficulties, normally throwing a tantrum, is different from when a crisis happen and then their problems start. And then they start exhibiting different symptoms, different ways of showing that they are unhappy with the current situation. Now, when I look at a genogram, I have to get all of these information at one shot. And it makes it easier for me to understand from where the family is coming from and what is affecting them the most. I hope all of you understand the reason why we are doing a genogram. Now, genogram is not just about drawing, it's also about the inference that we are getting from the genogram. All right. So we use the genogram to ask more questions about the family members, about transactional patterns that has come across families, and also traits that the families might have got from the other generation. Also about disorders or problems or physical problems that they could have got from through generations, and how traumatic were they, and any major life changes that has happened that has probably got the family into the situation they are currently in at that point of time. All right. So genogram, this is a very important way of understanding the structural positioning of the family at that point of time. The next aspect that will help us understand give a even more clarity about the family is the family life cycle stages. It looks like a very simple technique, but as we talk through each of the stages that the family is going in, it will unravel a mystery right in front of you. It'll be like reading a novel which you can't place it down. Every family has a story of its own. So when you go through the life cycle stages, you will understand what their story is about and what is their problem. that when you go through the life cycle stages, you will understand the presenting problem in a better light. Okay. So what do we look at? Why is family life cycle stages important? We have to understand that like children, every family will grow in their own pace. Not every family will have the same space out or time in which they have to go. Like the first year they have to do this, the second year they have to do this. It will not be like that. They will develop in their own pace and they will have their own ways of adapting to every stage. And we have to understand that pace and that method of adaptation that the family goes through. Now, using life cycle stages, what are the things that we have to understand? Now, before doing this, let's understand what are the different stages first. Now, the first stage is where the young adult is not married, on his own, probably living with the parents or on their own. It can be that. There are some schools that follow from that modality. But there are some schools who say the family life cycle stages start from the time the couple get married. So different schools have different approaches. It's up to us depending upon the need of the family, which school we are going to follow. All right. So let's say, for example, we are starting from families after they get married. So once they get married, what is the first stage? It's only the couple. Now, as couples, they are coming from two different families altogether, right? So what are the values they have brought in? What are the good things they have got together? What are the difficult things they have got together? On what aspects have they compromised on? How did they adjust and adapt? Who gave up what? What were the roles that was expected of each person? For example, I may not explicitly tell that I want my husband to say on a weekend, give me a break where I don't cook and he cooks. I can have it implicitly in my mind. I might think that I want my husband to do it. I might not talk about it. But my husband could have probably come from a background where men don't go into the kitchen at all. So obviously my husband is going to sit back and wait for me to do all the work all 365 days. You have the first clash. I have an expectation and that expectation is not being met. I'm disappointed, but it being the first stage and I've just got married and I'm going into a new family, into a new stage. So I'm trying to kind of compromise. I'm trying to work it out and I'm trying to see how I can balance it. But if that role kind of continues through each of the different stages, next stage is what? Having children. So a child is there, newborn, 0 to 2.5 years old. So babies are completely dependent, most often on mothers and also their fathers. But having a baby and having to do all the household chores without the husband being able to take a share or a part in any of that is just going to add on to my disappointment. And then my misunderstanding is just going to go one notch higher. The next stage, child is 2.5 to 6 years, school going stage. What do? I still don't have my husband's support. I'm still having to maintain everything at home. And if it's a working mother, it's going to be even more difficult. Correct? So my disappointment is going to just go rising high and high. Now, what will happen with the disappointment that I'm not talking about? It's going to spill out in all the other aspects of my life. But whatever my husband is going to look bad for me. You don't understand me will be the first sentence you will hear. I don't know what's happening, but you don't love me like before. You don't understand me like before. Where is that before? Where do they draw the line? They also don't know. But all they know is at that point of time, I'm very disappointed, I'm hurt, and I'm angry. Now, how will you understand the root of this problem? When you start gathering information right from the first stage. So the first stage is where the couple are married and they don't have children. They have to work out on their own adjustment levels at that point of time. All right. So their roles have to be defined. So for example, if a wife has an expectation from the husband, she has to explicitly tell it and say, you know what, this is what I expect from you. Would it be possible for you to do it? So if the husband is telling, no, I will not be able to do it, at what point can they meet? Can they compromise on something? Will they be able to meet at a midpoint on that? So these are aspects that they have to work out right at the first stage. Now, second stage, you have children where it's 0 to 2.5 year old of the firstborn. Okay, it's not the second child we're talking about. We're talking about the firstborn child's age. The life cycle stages will be based on the firstborn child's age. So it will be 0 to 2.5. Now, second stage, when you move, there are some families where you will have the second child in the first stage itself, or you will have the second child in the third stage, where it is 2.5 to 6-year-old. So you have a toddler in hand and you have another newborn in hand. It's going to complicate matters even more. So when families move from one stage to the other stage, they will have to make some changes. They will have to make some adaptations. Now, when they are not able to make that adaptation is when conflicts start rising. All right. So these are aspects that you have to look out for in terms of life cycle stages. At each stage, what were the roles that each member had to do? All right. Who made the decisions? And if whoever made the decisions, was it being accepted by everyone in the family, or were they not happy about the decision? Number two. Number three, how close were the family members? Were they too close that everybody was into everybody else's business, or they were very far apart where they were least bothered? Husband doesn't care whether wife is taking care of the children or not. He's busy doing his work, coming back. Wife doesn't bother. So are they like enmeshed together, or are they disengaged, or are they somewhere in between where they have a healthy connectedness and a healthy separatedness, where they know where they have to interfere in each other's work, and they also know where they have to give space to the other person? All right. And the other thing we have to understand is communication patterns. How good was it? Was it clear and open, where anything had to be told outright and people understood where the concept was coming from and they accepted it? Or was it ambiguous communication where it is not clear? I didn't understand what the person was trying to say. So my mother gave me an instruction. I didn't understand it. I understood it in my own perception. Therein starts the conflict. I'm not very clear. And I'm not going back and clarifying whether this is what she told. I'm just assuming that this is what my mom said. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Right? Simple things. So these are aspects that you will start looking at in each of the life cycle stages. Was it fulfilled? Was it not fulfilled? What were the difficulties they faced? And if there were any crisis situations that happened in any of these stages, were there any other major difficulties that happened in any of these stages? If it was there, what was the situation? What was the problem, or what was the crisis? How did the family cope with the situation? And how did they overcome that situation? These are different aspects that we have to look out for. All right. So what are the things you have to look out? You can deduce from collecting information based on a life cycle stages? You can get the interaction pattern among members of the family. You can see the adaptability of members across different stages, where they're able to move on, or did they get stuck in one stage, but age-wise they have been moving on, but they're still stuck as a child. Coping patterns of the family, like I said, when problems come, how did they cope with it? Parenting strategies. How good was it? How bad was it? Was it consistent? Was it not consistent? Was it too authoritative? Or was it too laissez-faire? It's okay, do whatever you want. What kind of parenting was there? All right. The unconscious expectations among the members. Now, what happens is when you get into the situation in the first place, you're a little nervous. You're thinking, okay, what should I do? Can I do this? Can I not do this? But over a period of time, you start living with the person. Then there are unsaid rules, unsaid norms that develop in each of the family. It will be based on our behavior, based on the regular pattern that we see each other doing over a period of time. So it will be a given statement that on Saturdays, you know that I'm working, I will not get up early. So why are you coming and fighting with me? No, you cannot ask like that. Whatever norms, whatever rules are there, it will be better if it is explicitly put down and said that, you know what, this is what is happening. So this day I need this break. Can we all work around it? Best way of doing it. But that's an ideal way of doing it, but most often doesn't happen. So there will be unconscious expectations from the members, which you can understand when you go through the life cycle stages. And then what are the specific roles that are there in each of the family members? Now, life cycle stages is one aspect of it. The next thing you will look at it is the structural map, or rather we're looking at the boundaries within which the family has been functioning. All right. Now, when we say boundaries, what are the things we are looking at? Last session, if you remember, I told you about 3 subsystems, right? Family is a system. If you remember the systems theory, family is a system, and there are 3 subsystems. One is the marital subsystem, which comprises of the husband and the wife. Then you have the parental subsystem, which comprises of the parents and the children. And then you have the sibling system, where it will be only the children. All right. Now, within this subsystem, how is the relationship? That is something that we will have to understand. Now, alignments and coalitions also happen. Now, what is alignment and coalition? Where 2 or more members of the family, either they join together against a third person, or they combine together, they side with each other, and they leave the other person out. All right. Now, these are different symbols that you can show families about this. Thank you. So now if you look at this, you have 2 squares and then 2 lines connecting both those squares, which says it is a close relationship. This is a normal relationship that should be there between 2 members of a family. The next one, if you look at it, there are 2 circles with joined with dotted lines, which says it is distant, as in they are not very close with each other. And then the third one, if you look at it, you have a circle and a square joined with 2 lines, and then you have a zigzag like in between, basically meaning they are close, but they are also hostile, which means that even though they are close, they try to understand each other. All of that happens, but still there's a kind of grudge that is always, there's a kind of hostility, a negativity that you always feel between the 2 of them. And for instance, in some families, you will have noticed that that is the way they will show their love, by constantly nagging, by constantly asking, by constantly irritating the other person. They will say, this is how I show my love for you. So these are examples of, close and hostile relationships. Then the next one, if you look at it, you have an arrow mark at the end of the line joining, which basically means the attention is focused only on that one person. All right. And then the next indicates sexual abuse. Down the second line of it, if you see 3 lines joining the square, basically means it's a fused relationship, meaning that there is no differentiation of boundary between both those people. Everything and anything has to be done together. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult. Okay. The next one, you see, it is completely hostile. It's only anger and hatred that you will see in these kind of relationships. Next one, it is fused and hostile, even more difficult. The next one, you see, it's completely cut off, disengaged. Father doesn't know what the son is doing or where the son is, doesn't care, completely cut off. In these kind of families, if you look at it, there will be no conversations at all. No discussions will happen there. Okay. And then the next one, if you look at it, this is about physical abuse. Okay, just all right. Now I just given an example of father, mother, daughter, and son here, and I have put on a map. All right, I'm keeping my chat open. What do you think is happening in this family? You can type in, the chat is open. Okay, father and son cut off. Father and mother have a closed hostile relationship. All right. Daughter and son are close. There looks like a discord between the father and the son. Okay, mother's focused on the son. All right. So pretty much you got the idea of what is happening in this family, right? Now, these kind of families we have most often seen in all of our life at one point or the other, where the mother's complete attention is on the son. My son, the boy may not be an achiever, he may not do anything, but the mother's focus will completely be on the son and say, he is good. So her focus will be solely on the son. Everything else is secondary in their life. And father and mother, the family runs, they are very close, but there's also hostility, primarily because of the relationship between the father and the son being cut off. Most often, if you look at it, mothers will constantly say, no, 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 you have to talk to him, you have to take care of him. She will be on both the sides. She will nag both of them, father and the son. All right. Now, father and daughter, usually it's a very fused relationship where father, anything he has to tell to the son will go through the daughter. Any information has to go through the daughter. That is why it's a fused relationship, because there's no demarcation of boundary there. All right. Now, daughter and son are a very casual relationship. Okay, why don't you just listen to what the father is telling? Just do what they say. Why worried? Why are you breaking your head too much about these things? It's a very casual kind of a relationship that the son, daughter and son share. All right. Now, this is how you will, this is called as a structural map of the family, which will help us understand interaction patterns. Like how genogram helped us understand various structural aspects of the family, the structural map will help us understand the interaction pattern, the boundaries, whether it is closed or open, whether it is permeable boundaries, whether the relationship is enmeshed or it is disengaged, whether the communication pattern, how it could be there in the family. Now, at what point will we draw a structural map? Once you're done with the life cycle stages, once you know what has been happening in the family right from stage 1 to the current stage, and then you will draw the structural map to help have a better understanding of what is happening within this family, who is siding with who, what could be the basic problem, why is this particular person called as the problem bearer, and why is this the problem behavior. All right. So when you look at the structural map, you will understand the interaction pattern. So put together the genogram, family life cycle stages, and the structural map will give you a holistic understanding of what is probably happening within this family. Understood? All right. So like I said, the other dimensions that we will be looking at is who makes decisions in the families, what is the impact of these decisions, whether people have agreed to this or not. Are the members of the family able to fulfill what is expected of them? Is one member of the family given more than he or she is able to do? For example, fathers being dumped with more work, mothers being given all the responsibility. Nobody wants to share any responsibility at home with her. How is the communication among the members? Is it clear, open, or semi-permeable? How close or how far are the family members from each other? Whether they are enmeshed or they are disengaged, or are they in between where they know when to be together and when to give space? Are they able to resolve problems as a family? And if they are, how do they do it? If they are not able to, or if they are able to solve problems, how are they doing it? These are other dimensions that we will have to understand. And we will get this information while we are talking about the family life cycle stages. All right. Now, circularity. Why are we talking again about circularity in our assessment? All these information that we are talking about is acquired through circular questioning. All right. Now, what is circular questioning? The information primarily aims at creating and bringing out the differences between relationships. I've just given a very basic example there, and we're also going to do like about a 2 or 3 minute role play on how to ask a circular questioning. I hope you can see the family. All right. I'll just introduce the family to you. This is Mr. S. He's the father. That's Miss M, Miss S. She's the youngest daughter. She's 13 years old. That is Mrs. E, she's the mother, and that is Miss M, she is 15-year-old. So we are starting this role play with the assumption that I have already initiated the session. So this is primarily to understand how we ask about a circular questions. Okay. Since we already know each other, Miss M, why have you all come here?
I don't know about them, but I was forced to be here.
Okay. Why?
I don't know. I'm here because I was told that if I don't come here, my phone will be taken away from me.
Okay. Okay. So when you say that, when they say that they will take the phone away from you, how does it make you feel?
Angry.
And then what do you do when you get angry? What do you do? Oh, okay. Mom is telling that you get rebellious. Why do you think she's saying that?
Because we fight a lot.
Okay. Who fights a lot?
Everyone in the family.
Everyone in the family. Okay. Miss S, you just heard what your sister said. What do you think about it?
Half the time she's not at home. So I think she's just lying.
Okay. Why would you say that?
Because there's good relation between.
Okay. You feel there is good relationship between dad and mom, whereas she feels that uh, all of you fight most often. Okay. Uh, what do you think is happening?
So the father is always busy, and then she's very rebellious. She wants to be out. She comes home late, and I really don't know what to do apart from just like giving her consequences. And she is just stuck in between. So, and for me, I have housework, everything to be done, to be taken care of, and there's no family time. I do not know what to do.
Okay. So you seem to be a little distracted and like not really focusing on what is happening. Would you want to tell what is happening there? What is happening here?
No, I am not much to say. My family is there. I take care of them as a member of the family, as a husband of the family. This is my responsibility.
Okay, but they are also stating that you heard them telling that there are fights. So what is your opinion about it? Why do you think they are talking about fights?
No, I did not hear much what they were saying because I was casually busy in my own world because I am working from morning till evening. So when I come back, I'm tired from my work. So I take bath and food and I go to sleep because I have to think about the next day morning.
Okay, now you heard him tell that his responsibility is to take care of the family, and he feels that he is doing it. What is your opinion about it?
All of that he's able to do, but when it comes to the family and taking care of the family in terms of building the relationship and building the family, I don't see anything happening here, and it's really stressful for me also, so I don't know what to do. It's just I've tried my best to talk to them and to just put
Okay.
my point across. They
So you're stating like as a third person, I'm hearing that you want to give more importance to relationships. Why?
because the family needs, I mean, the children need family time, and they need to know what it is to live in a family. I feel like there's no connection between the four of us, and it's really hard to, and I'm confused. I mean, I'm concerned about their future.
Okay. Uh, you heard what dad and mom said. What do you think is happening?
I don't know what's happening between them, but they seem to be very calm right now compared to how they are at home.
We are always calm. It's just that she just goes out of the way so that and then we'll have to start shouting at her.
So can you explain when mom shouts, what happens to you?
I shout back. I
Okay.
tell her how I feel, because I feel like she doesn't understand what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So do you think, is there any other way of making mom understand how you feel?
At that point, I can't, because she doesn't want to hear what I want to say.
Okay. What do you think is happening between mom and your sister?
Keeps on scolding everyone, including me and father as well.
Okay. About what?
Things around, if things are messed up, still she'll shout and everything.
I like things to be neat at home.
OCD type.
Okay.
Yes.
You heard them telling now that they are not happy with mom shouting at us. What do you think is happening between the three of them?
Yeah, because as I said, I go in the morning and come back in the evening, and it is the mother's responsibility to take care of the family, and she has to look into that. And I also has to provide for the finance for the house and to take care of the children.
Okay, you seem to be concentrating, or rather focusing more on your work. Where is that coming from?
Because I was brought up in that way, because I am the first child in the family, and financially we had a lot of problems. As I was studying, I started to do my part-time job, and I also took care of the family also in the financial matter. So in the course of time, I had to marry, and the second burden came on my head. So I feel I'm taking care of the family, support in terms of supporting in financial way.
Okay, so you are a very hardworking man in that sense. So what do you think? What do you think of what dad said right now?
The thing is, I think he should give some time to family as well, because we feel empty somewhere.
Okay, what do you think of what dad said right now?
All I can think about is how he just called us a burden.
Okay, all right. How does it make you feel?
Like a burden.
Okay, is that why you get angry?
Maybe.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I hope you heard the conversation. Now, if you look at, if you had heard the way I had tried to question all of them about where the whole source of the problem is coming from. Towards the end of the questioning, you would have understood that the fact that the father feels that his family is a burden could probably be the reason of why he is not spending enough time with the family, or being actually giving the time that they need his presence in the family, right? So this is how circular questioning works in helping you understand the reason why some things are happening, and why the presenting problem was primarily that the daughter was not at home, she's coming late, she's misbehaving. But if we looked at the way the conversation had taken us, it started moving in from away from the daughter towards the father, which is where the entire revolving, the problem seemed to be revolving around the fact that the father was not there in the house, and therefore all these problems started coming up. Now, this is how circular questioning will help us understand what is maintaining the symptom, or what could have probably caused the symptom, and how it is being sustained by other members of the family. Now, mother also seemed helpless in that, where she is not able to do anything except being rude or get angry with the children. And this is what they have experienced all along. Her mother's frustration is coming from the fact that the father was not there. So this is a circularity that they have probably been caught up in over a period of time. This is not something that would have happened just like that. Now, if you notice what the father said, forever he has been working, and work is all that he has been exposed to and all that he knows. Now, this kind of information will give you a clearer understanding of what the family is going through and what kind of intervention will help them. Now, circular questioning is not just about finding out what is happening. It's more about finding out what to do. Where are they caught up and how are we going to break that cycle? So here I've just given you examples of, say, Miss A, 15-year-old is the problem. Then the therapist like, when your daughter shouts in anger, what does your husband do? These are other questions that could possibly be asked. And then to Miss A, when you're angry, what do you think is happening with you? Are you using your rationality, or are you getting just emotional and just shouting out of your anger? So, and what do you think is happening between your wife and your daughter? You're asking that to the father. Or what do you think, when do you think this problem started? And who do you think continues the problem? Now, by asking these questions, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to create the difference across time between people and between the subsystems. I'm trying to create a difference where they understand where the difficulty is coming from, or where the problem is coming from. Until the difference is drawn, it will be difficult for the family to see where the problem is coming from. All right. Now, once you get these information, then you give a hypothetical understanding of what is happening in the family, which we all normally call as a circular hypothesis. Now, at the end of collecting all this information, these are 3 questions that you should be able to answer in terms of a hypothesis. What is the patient trying to tell through his or her symptom? What is the underlying problem, the main aspect that is a problem? How is the family maintaining the symptom? Third, why has the family come now for treatment? There must have been a precipitating event that happened, or a crisis that happened, that pushed them to come for treatment now. What is that? Now, why are these important? Because knowing this, knowing the core of the problem, is what will give us the understanding of how to break that pattern, how to help the family to relearn different patterns that are more adaptable and that are more positive in reframing what is happening in the family. Because for all you know, they are stuck in a cycle that they have been going on and on and on, and they have not been exposed to any other behavioral patterns. And that is something that the therapist has to introduce, or eventually, in terms of intervention. Now, after giving the hypothesis, what do we then do? We communicate the hypothesis to the family in a non-critical and positive way, number 1. And we also find out from the family whether our hypothesis is right. Are they also feeling that this is the problem that is happening in the family? You kind of make sure you and the family are on the same page. And then we explain the treatment plan to the family. And then we're looking at the frequency of sessions, how frequently and how many people have to come. Does everyone have to be there? So all of these questions will come up from the families. Then we start working on that. And if any other referral needs to be done, then the family has to be made aware of it. For example, if in this whole process, after hearing that the father feels that the family is a burden, any one of them can probably feel a little upset or a little down about it. Or say, over a period of time, mother's been so overburdened with work, she feels depressed. So they have to be sent for a psychiatric evaluation. So we need to make the referral for that. All right. So to make that referral, we need to be aware of the fact of whether the mother is depressed or not. Or are there any other symptoms that is persisting among any of the other members that needs to be taken care of, that needs to be looked at? Or in some instances, what will happen is, in case of small children, and they find out that the child is not communicating properly, the child has a problem in having eye contact, most families might not be aware that it is a problem, it's a developmental problem that the child is going through. So as a therapist, we need to identify that, help the family go through it, also make the adequate referral for treatment of the child, to know what is exactly happening to the child, why he or she is not able to reach that developmental milestone, what is the adequate diagnosis, and what kind of treatment has to be done. So all these also have to be done when we're setting the contract with the family before we start the intervention. All right. So this is in terms of assessment in that sense. What are the other practical aspects you have to keep in mind? Number one, what should the therapist be able to do? First of all, establish rapport and encourage empathy between family members. Now, how do I do that? When I start showing empathy towards every member in the family, then I'm teaching the family to be empathetic towards each other. When I am non-critical in giving my understanding to the family, when I am accepting of everything, of every member of the family, of all that they say, then I'm also teaching them the process of being empathetic. That's one way of doing it. And when we build up our rapport, how do we communicate with the family members? Makes a lot of difference. So we, as a therapist, we also have to encourage clear and open communication throughout the sessions. Whatever it is, they will have to be able to tell it out in the session. And we have to encourage them to tell it in the right way. I may be angry about the fact that my husband is not there with me, but if I tell it in an angry mode, again, I'm going to be wrong about what I say. But reframing that anger and being able to communicate that anger in words, in situations, in a clear communication is something that the therapist has to encourage each of the members to do. And while they are doing that, we will have to be ready to mediate, because sometimes when there is clear and open communication that is suddenly introduced into the family, when they have been dysfunctional for such a long time, it's going to become very chaotic. So as a practitioner, we have to be very careful of how we introduce that in small doses, and gradually you increase the pace of that. Clarify conflict by working on boundaries and misunderstandings. We just saw that boundaries can be either enmeshed or they can be disengaged. Now, where is that concept coming from? What is the misunderstanding about? We have to be able to work on that. Identifying hidden conflicts and making the family aware of the same. Okay. Now, there are hidden conflicts. Hidden conflicts is something that families don't talk about at all. You keep talking to them on and on, they will be going on about the situation rather than the problem. So that is something that we'll have to be able to identify as a family. Now, it introduces more appropriate behavior, emotions, and attitudes that the family did not have before. Like I said, we'll reframe the behavior for them, or we will help them relearn new behavior or new attitudes and aspects. As a therapist, we should also be able to use interpretation and confrontation appropriately to minimize conflict, guilt, and fear. Okay. Now, when the father said, I feel that my family is a burden, I can bring in my bias and say, how can you even talk like that? Or on the other hand, I can be polite about putting the feedback to the father, but not hurting him in the process. All right. So these are other aspects that we have to think of in terms of assessment. So this is not the complete assessment or rather holistic assessment that we're talking about. These are main dimensions that we have to take care of before we enter into a family therapy like that, or you start working with a family. All right. Now, if you need tools, there are standardized tools that are there, which you can also use to understand the family in a better way. Now, there are some tools like McMaster Family Functioning Scale, or Impact on Family Scale, or Family Adaptability, Cohesion Evaluation Scale. So there are various standardized tools that can also help you understand the family in a better light. These can also be used as part of assessment. All right. So I hope it was informative. It's over to you guys. We are open for interaction. So you can, like the last session, you can send in your questions on the chat. Family disorders that are not diagnosed, that is where, like I said, when we're looking at referrals, we have to be able to identify if the family members have been diagnosed or not. Because most often families do not know that the person is having a disorder in the first place. They just think that the person is doing all this because they are not good. or their character is bad, their behavior is bad. All right. So we have to be able to identify that. Sometimes, okay, just give me a sec. Okay, sometimes parents come for a parenting problem. At what stage should the therapist involve all the family members? Uh, right from when you know it is a family, if it's a parenting problem, then it is there has to be the involvement of children. So right from the beginning, you need to have all the members of the family, all the significant members. Now, sometimes they will say, our grandparents also staying with us. No, hold on, it has to be the parents and the children first. Start working with them, because if that system is stronger, anything from the supra system will not be able to enter into it. The very fact that they are telling that grandparents are more important itself is a fact that they are getting enmeshed into the supra system, which basically means that the boundaries are not very clear. So that is something we have to work on, strengthening the boundary of the system itself. What if one member asks to speak to you alone? Please do not encourage it, because either inside the session or outside the session, they will try to tell you that they are on the right side. So which is again going to be difficult, because if whether you know it or whether the other family members know it or not, inside your head as a therapist, you will start developing bias for this one person. Say, for example, mother comes to you alone and says, you know how much I've done for this family, I have done so many things. Then you, without your knowledge, you start moving towards the mother one way or the other. And when that bias comes in, then it becomes difficult to break the family inside the session. So never encourage separate sessions with family members. If you're seeing a family for session and then you feel one of the family member also requires individual work, please do not do it on your own. For the individual work, please refer the family to someone else. That person can be seen by another therapist, and you both can work together in coordination on what you're going to focus on. How can we build rapport in a family? Okay, one of the ways is the way you make sure that everybody gets equal opportunity in the session kind of makes the family feel that everybody is important in your side. That itself will help you build a good amount of rapport. And most importantly, when you have children or adolescents in the family, start your conversation with them. Most often when they come, children or adolescents, they will be the problem. They will be the problem bearer. And always as adults, we also tend to start talking with the parents. Okay, tell me what happened. And because they would have called you for appointment and everything. So the tendency is natural for us to start with the parents. But that gives us a disadvantage to build rapport with the children and the adolescents. So we need to start talking with them, make them feel that we have given them the first importance to find out what they feel is happening, and then you move to the parents, one step at a time. Especially in the older generation, okay, I don't know how many old people you've got for session like that, because most often they don't come. It's either they take care of their families, they give up and they go ahead with it, or they separate and they go. There's also recent studies showing there's increased divorce rate in old people, like above 60 plus or 70 plus, because they're like, I've been putting up with this person for all my life, I'm done with it, now I'm settled and I want some peace of mind. That's like another extreme of family therapy that happens. But again, like I said, whether it is children or adults or old people, make sure your attention is equally divided among all the family members. And when you're giving a feedback, be positive in how you're reframing that behavior to all of them. That itself will give the family the understanding that you are there for all of them, and that will help you build the rapport. Okay, why past experiences tend to repeat again in new families? See, this is a basic understanding that your brain is wired in a particular pattern. You have been brought up in a certain set of ways, and you have been taught certain values and norms in your childhood, and you carry it through your adolescent stage. and your neural pathways are already developed in those aspects. So suddenly for anyone to change that norm and shift to a new pattern or a new way of doing things is very difficult for anybody. Even the most easiest change that you can bring about is in children, and even for them bringing about a change and able to be able to sustain that change, it takes about anywhere near 3 months to 6 months for an adolescent or a child with a problem. It's even more difficult in adults. So what we learn in our families is what we keep carrying forward in our life, because that's how our brain is wired. So to suddenly stop doing that and to relearn something new, it takes time. And more than time, we have to be convinced that I am making this change because it is good. I'm making this change because I want to make the change and I'm not being forced to make that change. So all these parameters have to be looked at. Therefore, this is one of the basic reasons why we keep carrying habits. Like we have heard of this, old habits die hard. What we learn is what we will be carrying forward. How to make a person to listen to the other family member as he's not ready to listen but assume things. Always the response is anger. Okay. If you are talking about resistance, see, most often why they don't listen to the other person is because there could be several reasons. One is they are afraid, what if secrets come out? Every family has a secret. So one of the main reasons of anger and resistance is this: what if the secrets come out? That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at is, I have been taking care of this family all along, and suddenly someone comes up and says that what you have been doing all along is wrong, is very difficult for a person to accept it. All right. So how you paraphrase it will make a lot of difference. And after doing all of this, if the resistance is still there, then what you might probably have to do is give that person a little more time, or when you start the session, give that person the time to talk about it, let the steam out, and then you ask the others to not respond to that, because if they respond to it, it will become a problem. They might end up reacting to what the person is telling. You will have to ask them to reframe or see how the family can be supportive about what this person is feeling. Once the person feels understood and accepted, then they will have a lot more space for listening to what the others have to say. Even as a therapist, sometimes what we do is we also start saying that when we give a feedback, when our feedback also ends up being negative, telling that, maybe you should also do this, you should do that, then again they're going to put up a resistance, because whatever has been happening in the family till now has maintained the homeostasis of the family. Suddenly you're introducing something new, you're tipping the balance. So the entire family is deceived about the fact that they have to make a change. If provided the family has come willingly, then they will understand, okay, this is going to happen, let's be ready for it. But if they have been forced to come, then they will not be prepared for the imbalance, and therefore you will find a lot of resistance. So you have to analyze all these things and then see where the resistance is coming from. Then you will be able to work out with the person. When there is a problem between the couple, should the children be involved? If the problem is revolving around the children, then yes. But also be sensible about taking a call. If you're going to talk about sexual relationship of the husband and the wife, and you have small children or adolescents sitting there, you first talk to the parents and see how you want to take it through. Preferably not to have the children in the session. If it is about behavior patterns, if it is about relationships, then yes, you need to have the children, because one way or the other, we spoke about triangulation the other day. If the couple are using the children to go ahead. And again, like I said, if you want to work with the couple alone and you also have to work with the family, please deal with one of them and let the other be dealt with another therapist. Don't do both by yourself. Don't do family therapy and couple therapy together. for the same person, because then you're going to be biased one way or the other, and the family is also going to feel that you're given more importance to one person and not too much of importance to the other person. So if you want the couple to be looked at separately, refer them to someone, you look at the family, or vice versa, whichever is comfortable. The person who comes with the presenting problem is just the tip of the iceberg. So should all the problem be explored with this methodology? History repeats itself. Is it an absolute thing? How often is this true? Okay, let me go with the first one. Like you rightly pointed out, it is not always that the problem behavior or the problem bearer comes first, but there are some instances where families do walk in directly all by themselves and then say, you know what, we all find that something is not okay with us and we need help. So then you directly go ahead with the life cycle stages and how they are living right now, what are the living conditions. So it need not be necessary that you always start with the presenting problem. Like I said, this is not the absolute assessment. These are important dimensions to be looked at. That's one. History repeats itself. Is it an absolute thing? How often is this true? Most often it is true. Sometimes people are sensible enough, they try to make the change, they adapt and they come. But you can't say all the time it happens, but most often, yes, it does happen. How do we explore problems that are having roots with biology? Okay, little. Okay, we are running short of time. Let me see how many more questions. Okay, let me see how much I can answer. We obviously can't fight with roots of biology as family problem, but what we can do is, there is something called as restructuring, retraining, relearning things, which can help us re-evaluate the environment in which we are living. Now, science has also proved us that even genetical difficulties can be manipulated using a good environment. So yes, there is a possibility of working it out, depends upon the situation and the problem that is put in front of us. Do we always need the entire time family for each session? Yes, preferably please have all the family. If it's a family therapy session, you need all the members in the family to work it out. That's a must. There is no negotiations on that. If they're working in different cities, just work out a time which will be suitable for all of you. I understand right now it's a difficult thing to do. What if one of the parent believes that child should grow in fear to be disciplined, resorts to corporal punishment, or is causing severe harm? Like I said, you need to help both of them find a midway. You can't just go with what one parent says, which basically indicates, again, there is a problem between in the marital subsystem. So if one parent is trying to overrule the other parent, then invariably there is an understanding that problem is in the marital subsystem. You need to start working on that. Who should we give more prominence in the family? There is nothing like that. If we start tipping the balance like that, it's going to be it's not going to work out. We have to give equal importance to every member who is present in the family. How can we deal when we discern that the family problem is spiritual? I'm talking about problem that can be repeated. Okay, may I know who this is? Christina George. Okay. Christina George, can I respond to this question on the mail? I will make a note of it and I will definitely get back to you on this. Fathers unwilling to come for session. Yes, there will be families like that. It will be sometimes they will not want to come at all. We can try our best to talk to the person. Like, for example, what we used to do is, as trainees, we will take the personal number of the father or the person who does not want to come, and we will try to talk to them over the phone and explain to them why we need them there, and say and tell them how important their presence and what a difference their presence will make at that point of time. Most often it works out. They do come for a session or two. We also tell them that, you know what, you can come, you can try. If it works out, fine. If you're still not convinced, you're always free to drop out of the session. So this definitely works out. So try if you want to do that, but also be careful when you're making the call. Sometimes it can end up as a misunderstanding. How we communicate as a therapist makes a lot of difference. And the initial point of contact that we make with the family, either on the phone or in person, the initial point of contact and how we deal with them at that point of time makes all the difference there. The therapists don't have the competence, only then do you do referral. No, not necessarily. Referrals are not done just about for competence. Referrals are also done when we feel that if we are doing everything by our own, then we are tipping the balance. So somewhere to maintain that balance, we will have to do this to maintain and make sure that our bias doesn't get in. So referrals are also done for that. I think we are running short of time. Thank you all for this wonderful time. I'm really encouraged to see so many questions coming up. We will meet again next Friday, same time. Have a nice week.